The reality that Russian effectively didn't prove the Islamic Republic was fake in a sentimental sense. It proved something far more consequential. It proved that the regime is vulnerable at the level that matters most in hard power. It means command, concealment, cash flow, and coercive depth. That's a structural core. And once that core was hit, the regime didn't respond like a rising regional power. It responded like a blanket state under siege, improvising with propaganda, repression, and economic blackmail because its old model of deterrence had failed. Well, let's be very precise because precision matters. This was not an innocent regime collapse story. US intelligence owned public line in March was that the regime remained intact but largely degraded. Reuters reports that made it the ruling system still looked entrenched, even after the killing of Al Khamenei and other senior female figures. So if you're Sanders, did the state disappear overnight? The answer is no. It's also impossible. That's the wrong standard because the right standard is whether the regime can still do what it was built to do: deter attack, hide its center of gravity, dominate organized violence at home and also abroad, and project a revolutionary vision across the region, and destroying Israel. On each of those metrics, the war exposed deep and potentially irreversible damage. So this is not just a fallacy at all. This is the fallacy. Here's why. People hear Iran survived. They conclude Iran system still works. That doesn't follow. A state can survive and also still be strategically broken. The Ottoman Empire survived the military defeats for decades and for centuries, actually, after its long decline began against Russia. And the Soviet system, Soviet remained armed and repressive right until the moment it ceased to be forced into legitimate prestige and economic durability, right? In Iran's case, the war revealed a regime that can still punish, still execute, still arrest, still launch missiles, but can no longer reliably secure its own leadership, shield external network or finance escalation without strangling itself. That's not resilience, that's direct range of survival. So my thesis is very straightforward. The 2026 war exposed four fatal weaknesses in Islamic Republic. First, it was deterrence failed. Second, intelligence penetration reached the regime's inner room. Third, the state format turned out to be less severe than a mutual choke chain that Iran's own economy are failing break blackout. And fourth, the regime entered the war only weeks after a mass domestic uprising, and at the end, when its main proxy belt was already degraded or under pressure to the south. So put all together, and what emerges is not a revolutionary power on the march, what emerges as a survival machine with diminishing margins. And that last point is the most important one, I believe. Fatal weakness does not mean collapse tomorrow morning. It means every road forward is strategically bad. Rebuild the missiles fort and you invite renew the strikes. You open Hormuz unconditionally and you surrender leverage. Keep Hormuz restricted and you keep bleeding the economy. Losing repression, this truth comes back. Tighter repression, you hollow out legitimacy even further. So try to revive the old liberation ideology and society shrinks. Abandon it for nationalism and you admit the original project has lost traction. That's what the epic fury revealed, not theatrics, not headlines, strategic exhaustion battle. So let's look at the actual bit. I mean, deterrence for Tehran was never just about possessing missiles. Deterrence meant convincing outside power that the cost of striking the regime center would be prohibitive. It means keeping the leadership survivable, the retaliation credible, their defense network functional enough to complicate penetration in the proxy belt, dense enough to widen any war beyond that Washington or Jerusalem would tolerate. The opening phase of Epic Fury showed that premise in a matter of hours. Official U.S. military fact sheets say that the operation began at 1:50 a.m. on February 28, and first 24 hours strike more than 1,000 targets, including command and control centers, IRGC headquarters, intelligence sites, integrated air system, ballistic missiles, naval ships, submarines, and anti-ship missile sites, and military communication past their superior radio Al Khamenei. This is not a calibrated warning shot, that's a decapitation architecture. More important, the leadership target was not symbolic. I mean, US and Israeli intelligence timed the attack to coincide with a meeting involving Al Khamenei and top aides, including Ali Shamkhani and Ali Larijani. After Israeli intelligence detected that the meeting was happening earlier than expected, that was moved forward once that meeting was confirmed. Khamenei was killed. his compound was destroyed. This strike package was deliberately designed to hit first before he could disappear into a hardened fallback network. If your super leader is killed while holding a supposedly secure meeting with his inner circle, then deterrence has already been failed at the toppest layer. And then came the second blow. I mean, by March 1, Reuters reported that Israel said it's established aerial security, or Tehran, unless right, his intelligence security command centers across the capital. So, I mean, read that again slowly, not like me fast. Uh, a regime that had spent decades building layered defensive, systematic, and dispersing critical military infrastructure lost control of the skies over its own capital essentially at the outset of the war. Even if one discounts battlefield rhetoric from the belligerent, the operation fact matched the picture. Integrated air defense systems were among the first targets in the official US targets list, and the subsequent official briefing described the total dominance over the skies and sharply failing Iranian missile under attack rates. So now did they run back? Absolutely yes. I mean, Iran's missile attacks on Israel and Gulf states on day one, but casualties in Emirat and also major disruption across the region. So CSIS assessed that by day 4, Iran had launched more than 2,000 drones and 500 ballistic missiles in total reporting, and Reuters later described the regime strategy as one of the injuries. Missiles, drones, energy shock, and economic disruption rather than a hope of matching US and Israeli conventional power. So this was not a non-response, it was a harsh, damaging, region-wide response. But that still doesn't rescue deterrence, because the key question is not whether Iran could impose costs. The key question is whether those costs stop the strategic degradation of the regime's core assets. They did not. In fact, the trend line ran the other way. On March 5, Admiral Brad Cooper said ballistic missiles attacked were down 90% from day one, and drones attacked down 83%. Reuters also reported the Israeli military saying around 60% of the Iranian ballistic missiles launchers had been knocked out by the same stage. And by late March, even more cautious Reuters intelligence report, one that specifically pushed back against inflated victory claims. It still said that the Pentagon assessed the missile and also drone attacks were down about 80% since the start of the war, and that more than 2/3 of Iranian missile, drone nodes, and naval production facilities and shipyards had been damaged or destroyed. In other words, even the skeptical data show a regime was retaliatory tempo dropped dramatically under sustained attack. Now, here is a caveat, because good analyst lives in the caveat, right? So Reuters also reported in late March that the United States could only confirm what certainly that about 1/3 of Iran's missile arsenal has been destroyed. That much of the rest may have been damaged, buried, or something inaccessible, definitely eliminated, right? So that matters. I mean, it means that Tehran remained dangerous. It means that the regime still held a significant inventory. It means that the war didn't erase Iran's ability to hurt its enemies. But again, that doesn't restore deterrence. Deterrence is not, I can still fire some missiles after my super leader is met. My capital's airspace is penetrated. My launch rate is collapsing, and my production base is under attack. That's not deterrence, that's damage limitation. So fact number one is simple. The deterrence died first, not because Iran could not retaliate at all, but because retaliation failed to prevent the strategic unmaking of a system that was supposed to guarantee regional survival. The opening assault killed the supreme leader, hit the command layer, broke the air defense network enough to Tehran skies, to open Tehran skies, and pushed Iran in retaliation onto a declining curve within days. A state can survive that. A deterrent reputation does not. So the premise that Iran remained an impermeable security state is fundamentally flawed. The regime that sold itself is supported as the great master of the clandestine defense turned out to be vulnerable to foreign penetration at multiple levels simultaneously: strategic, operational, and social. Reuters reported that the US Israeli officials say the opening attack was triggered with intelligence confirmed that Khamenei was meeting senior advisor at a secure location. Israeli intelligence detected that meeting and had moved to Saturday morning. The strike schedule was advanced, and the attack was launched before the participants could scatter. That's not random battlefield lag. That's fused intelligent penetration at the level of the leadership, movement, and secure meeting awareness. Didn't you see I mean, based on Reuters reporting surfaced, I mean, uh, Israeli intelligence had spent years hacking Tehran traffic camera network and monitoring the movement patterns of Khamenei's bodyguards and senior Iranian officials. Whether every detail of that reporting is ultimately confirmed is less important than the broader point. The physical security environment around the regime's leadership was insufficient, penetrable, that outside actors could build a targeting um, picture over time. So combine that with Reuters reporting on the strike, on the strike timing, and also the result is obvious. So this was not merely a successful air raid, it was the culmination of a deep reconnaissance and surveillance effort against the regime's most protected human targets. So now look at the social layer, because that's where the history becomes even more damaging to the regime. So Iran had arrested around 500 people accused of sharing information with enemies. It's based on a report from Reuters. So it said link outlets cited arrests of people allegedly sending location details of military and security assets to Israel. Israel had begun targeting, based on the Reuters report again, checkpoints based on offs from informants on the ground. A few days later, Reuters reported that the intelligence minister said it had arrested 30 alleged spies and also operations linked to Israel and the United States of America, while the police chief said 61 others had been detained for sharing information with hostile media and foreign enemies. Again, make the distinction clearly. Wartime authoritarian regime often were erased and fabricate charges. This is true, but if your response to the first week of the war is mass spy panic on this scale, you're not displaying counterintelligence master, you're displaying counterintelligence breach. And then there is the resort to execution. Reuters reported on May 24 that Iran executed a man accused of sending information about defense industry to the United States of America and also Israel during the war. It also reported the execution of 2 other people on security-related charges on May 21. The broader UN picture is even harsher. On April 21, Reuters got the UN human rights chief as saying Iran had executed at least 21 people and arrested more than 4,000 on national security-related charges since the war began. Some of those executions were connected to January reports, others to alleged opposition members or espionage. This is not a behavior of a confident security apparatus that has sealed the bridge. This is the behavior of a regime trying to terrorize its way back to the opacity. There is another brutal indicator here as well. Reuters reported that during the war, Iran's own intelligence operatives signaled openness to CIA talks to end the conflict through third country channels. According to New York Times, Tehran publicly denied it. Fine, but whether the signal was real, exploratory, or part of the psychological maneuver, the very existence of that report tells you something about the status of the state. The inner organs of the state are no longer operating as a seamless ideological block. And there were figures. There were fear, and there was a recognition, something inside the machine. The machine had been penetrated, and that contributed alteration might be unsustainable. And the deepest humiliation is this: the regime couldn't even protect the symbolism of security. Supremacy was striking the company. The intelligence ministry itself was later shown damage and supplement imagery carried by Reuters. Checkpoints were allegedly hit from tip-offs. Informant hands spread across province. Execution followed. In a functioning revolutionary security state, intelligence exists to protect the myth of the invulnerability. In Iran's case, epic fury exposed to the myth's theater. The regime has still interrogators. It still has prisons. It still has the capacity to kill and intimidate. But a security apparatus is not judged by how loudly it panics after a breach. It is judged by whether the breach happens in the first place. Here, the breach reached the apex. So fact number 2 is even more devastating than the first one. The Islamic Republic security state is not hollow because it lacks brutality. It's hollow because the brutality is what remains after secrecy and prevention have failed. When leadership can be tracked, the compound can be tracked, the, the meeting can be timed, the informant network can operate, the regime's answers hundreds of arrests and a fresh wave of execution. The conclusion writes itself. The state can still terrorize, it can no longer reliably secure itself. And let's demolish another comfort. Tehran has always liked to imply that the state form was a strategic ace, the vantage that can force adversaries to back off. That's after almost as leverage. If you can weaponize the disruption without collapsing your own revenue base, once an US naval blockade enters the equation, the strait becomes the site of mutual strangulation. So, on the side more dependent on constrained export bleeds first. So, Reuters reported in March that Iran's wartime strategy was based on endurance and market shock because its planners recognized the limits of facing superior conventional forces directly. So that is the tell. I mean, the regime's supposed mastercard was, in practice, as asymmetric substitute for conventional weakness. Now the numbers. I mean, Reuters reported on April 15 that the US blockade, which began on April 13, that prevented 2 million barrels per day of Iranian crude from reaching China. And you know what's China? China is Iran's main buyer. The analyst told Reuters at that time Iran could withstand a complete halt on export for perhaps 2 months before having to cap production, depending on how much one onshore storage it could actually use. This is not strategic for this stuff use. I mean, once storage begins to fill, production must fall. Once production falls, cash flow tightens. And once the cash flow tightens inside the country already hit by inflation, unemployment, strike on industry, and sanctions, the regime's room for maneuvers shrinks very quickly. The shipping data were even uglier. Reuters reported on April 30 that only a handful of carriers carrying Iranian crude left the Gulf of Oman between 13 and 25 April, down more than 80% from a comparable March period. When Iran had exported 23.4 million barrels, it reported that the crude was stranded on tankers as Iranian storage sites ran out of space. On April 27, Reuters said 6 tankers carrying an estimated 10.5 million barrels have been forced back to Iranian ports. And the US forces has turned back 37 vessels since the blockade began. The same reported that vessel traffic through the strait had dropped from the usual 125 or 125 to 114 ships a day before the war to just 7 in previous 24 hours. None of them carrying oil for the local market. It's good to point out this. This is not a controlling enemy from grand strategic sense. That's paralyzed. Yes, Tehran could still restrict transit and extract permission dynamics. Reuters reported on 24 May that Iran's Revolutionary Guard said 33 vessels has passed through in the previous 24 hours after getting Tehran's permission. But Reuters also noted that this was still fall below the roughly 140 vessels typically before the war, and that full flows were not expected to return before 2027, even if a deal was reached. In other words, the regime demonstrated not secure command or commercially our trade, but the ability to degrade the system so truly that everyone, including Iran, paid the practice. This is a sabotage delivery. That's sustainable strategic control. And the global side effect matters because they underscore the disruption of the tactics. Reuters called the war's oil disruption the world's largest. So Brent crude had jumped by about $50 a barrel since the war began, according to Reuters April 13 reporting. So hundreds of ships and around 20,000 seafarers were stranded inside the Gulf. But the head of the International Maritime Organization warning of mounting psychological strain and growing accident risk. Tehran could certainly raise the cost, but raising the cost is not the same as winning. If your economic grand strategy boils down to hurt everyone badly enough that maybe they accept our frozen assets or our oversight claims and our blockade relief demands, you're no longer projecting confidence. You're bargaining from siege conditions. So that's exactly what Reuters and later reporting showed. By mid-May, Iranian sources close to the establishment were telling Reuters that Tehran didn't want a prolonged no war, no peace scenario because inflation was rising and inflation was worsening and a strike on key industries were bleeding an already battered economy. Think about that again. The regime's public posture was defiance. Its private imperative was to end the economic choke before social pressures became unmanageable. This is why the Hormuz story matters so much. It is the clearest demonstration that Iran's external revolution now rests on tactics that simultaneously undermines its internal stability. That's not a position of strength. That's an admission that the regime's last big card is one in but it cannot play for long without damaging the foundation beneath its own feet. So fact number 3 is straightforward. I mean, the Strait of Hormuz didn't reveal Iran's strategic mastery. It revealed the regime siege mentality. I mean, Tehran can still disrupt by veto, delay, and shock, but it cannot convert the disruption into durable economy advantage or key in political win. Once the blockade bit, oil started backing up, tankers turned around, storage constraint loomed, and the regime's supposedly sovereign choke point became a giant reminder that the heavily sanctioned export-dependent state can indefinitely weaponize the artery from which it also drinks. And here is where the final and externalist refuse. The regime entered the war not from a position of consolidated domestic claim, but immediately after the worst internal unrest since the early revolutionary periods. The protests began on 28 December 2025. Reuters reported on 9 January that the internet and also phone lines were blocked as the unrest spread and that dozens had already been killed in the early phase. By January 18, Reuters cited an Iranian official saying authorities had verified at least 5,000 deaths, including 500 security personnel. On February 12, Associated Press cited activists saying the crackdown death tolls had reached at least 7,005. The OHCHR report in March avoided endorsing one single figure, but described thousands killed and tens of thousands detained and called the state response without recent precedent. The range matters. You shouldn't pretend, certainly where the data are contested, but the floor alone is, catastrophic. And the preparation didn't end because the war started. It intensified. Reuters reported on April 29 that the UN human rights chief said Iran has executed at least 20 people and arrested more than 4,000 on national security charges. I said this before, I think. Yeah, since the war began. And also we have reports from Reuters, let's say it, and they reported 21 May and also 24 May execution tied to security offenses and wartime information sharing, right? And the OHCHR, what the fuck, report documented not only killing and detention, but also the weaponization of digital infrastructure, attack on medical neutrality, forced disappearances, intimidation of families, and the use of the secrecy to raise accountability. That's the backdrop against which the war unfolded. So when people ask whether the regime still has a monopoly on violence, the answer is yes, it still has massive coercive capacity, but it's using that capacity because underlying concept and social fear management are failing. That's a brittle monopoly, not a stable one. Now connect this straight to the battlefield. DNI Tulsi Gabbard told the Senate on March 18 that Iran's economy was already breaking a maximum pressure under renewed sanction, and that this had contributed to mass protests earlier in the year that Tehran put down by killing thousands. She added that even if the regime remained intact, internal tensions were likely to increase as the economy worsened. That's critical. The regime may have suppressed visible mobilization, but its own economic deterioration machine still works. The political and also economic foundation that makes coercion sustainable under far more stress. But there is external buffer. We have that also, the so-called acts of resistance. ODNI 2026 trade assessment said Iranian aligned actors, including Hamas and Lebanese Hezbollah, had been severely degraded by Israeli operation, U.S. intelligence and weaponized support, and U.S. operation in the region. So It was also noted that these groups still retain capacity for asymmetric attacks. Yes, they still can. The Yemenis just attacked Israel a couple of days ago. That's the right formulation. I mean, degraded, not erased. But degradation is enough to change the strategic equation. The regime's old model relied really on forward to proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, Kataib Hezbollah, Al Nasr, and other proxies, terrorist groups. So that attacking Iran proper risked layer escalation from Lebanon, Gaza, Iraq, Yemen, and beyond, and and also Syria before the fall of Assad. Epic Fury showed that these layers were tiny and needed to be. I mean, Hezbollah is the curious example. Reuters reported in January that the Lebanon army said it had taken operational control in the south and that the state was pursuing a monopoly on arms, part of a disarm, disarmament push against Hezbollah after the 2024 war. On March 2, Reuters reported that Lebanon's government banned Hezbollah military activities after it fired on Israel to avenge Khamenei's killing, a move Reuters described as a reflecting dramatic shift in Lebanon's power balance because since Hezbollah had pummeled in the previous war. On April 17, Reuters reported that the US-backed ceasefire that takes recognized Lebanese security forces as having exclusive responsibility for national defense, explicitly tied to the bid to disarm Hezbollah. And on May 3, Reuters reported internal Hezbollah casualty estimates suggesting 5,000 fighters had been killed in the previous war. Dangers to Israel, alongside mounting this displacement and political backlash. So that matters because Tehran's survival model was never purely domestic; it was imperial. I mean, and method imperial, even if it's South imperial in this case. The regime's real monopoly on violence was a cross-border monopoly of intimidation, Iraq and Lebanon militias and Iraq drones from Yemen network across Syria, and the constant implication that escalation against Tehran would spill across the entire regional theater. Once Hezbollah is badly weakened, and once the Lebanese state is openly moving toward army exclusivity, once ODNI says the main proxy actors are severely degraded, the regime loses their strategic depth. It still has sharp instruments. It no longer has the same padded perimeters. So now, to be absolutely fair, Reuters also reported in May that there had been little sign of an organized domestic opposition after the war started. This is true, and we should say it plainly, but that point doesn't defeat the argument. It reinforces it. You know why? Because the absence of visible organization after months of war does not mean restored legitimacy. It means the regime is surviving through saturation, repression, execution, arrest, surveillance, blackout, tactics, and exploitation of war paralysis. A government that has to kill thousands in January, arrest thousands more after February, execute security suspects in May, and drape capital in emergency propaganda does not have margin. It has force. Margin is something else. Margin is the ability to absorb a military shock without fearing the street, the cash flow, the provinces, the prisons, the proxy. The margin is gone right now. So fact number 4 is this. The war did not create the regime's internal crisis. It's correlated with the ones already in motion. And because the external proxy built had been degraded at the same time, the regime lost comfort of a strategy precisely when domestic fragility was highest. Tehran still commands gun, but the street remains haunted. The economy remains brittle. The prisons are failing, and the outer ring of armed clients no longer offers the same insulations. That's what a shrinking monopoly on violence looks like in real life. And I would say the last and deepest vulnerability is the 2026 war didn't simply damage Iranian military assets. It exposed the exhaustion of the regime's governing idea, right? Reuters reported on May 21 that Iranian authorities had shifted their propaganda heavily from revolutionary religious imagery to nationalism and historical symbols. Reuters says that the old ideological formula no longer had much traction in society and that the regime was trying to mobilize broader national identity instead. We have also reported that the power had shifted sharply during the war from clerics to revolutionary guards commanders, accelerating a long-running transformation from theocratic rule toward a more orderly military form of rule. That's not like very, 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 very good news, by the way. That's the worst news, actually. Not, I mean, I'm not going to compare this and saying this was better and that was both are worse, but this is also not a very good news. And they're going to talk about that later. That's, I mean, that's not ideological confidence. It's ideological substitution. Think about it. I mean, think about what it means. I mean, the Islamic Republic was founded as not as a normal state nation, right? It's not a nation state. I mean, it's not a status quo nation state, but as a revolutionary project. I mean, clerical guardianship, anti-fascist resistance, anti-Zionism. That's regional export and fusion of religion with the state legitimacy. But once the old message stops mobilizing the population, once the guards overshadow the clerical class, and once wartime propaganda must borrow heavily from pre-revolutionary national symbols and even visibly relax some old media taboos, the system is telling that original legitimate language has been depleted. It can still rule, but it can no longer inspires in a way it once claimed to. That's the difference between a revolutionary regime and a security regime. Epic theory exposed the moment of transition. The negotiation and the deadlock around Hormuz make the same point from another angle. I mean, Iran officially described missiles, nuclear capabilities, and controls over the state of Hormuz not as a policy choice, but as ideological purpose of the Islamic Republic's survival. Stop there. They are calling it survival. They're not calling it liberation, not export revolution, not regional transformation, but survival. The entire vocabulary has collapsed in war. Tehran is no longer speaking like a state confident in its transformative nation. It is speaking like a state trying to preserve assets, avoid humiliation, and permanent internal fuel fractures while negotiating war blockade, relief frozen funds, uranium formula, and passage rights. This is not a revolutionary movement. This is a defensive bargaining. And the isolation is stark. In your Senate testimony, the bar said that Iran has assumed Russia, China, and also North Korea would provide support during both the 2025 12-day war and also Epic Fury. And had infrastructure, the support was very limited or non-existent. That's enormously revealing. I mean, a regime that built so much of its posture around anti-Western alignment discovered in its most serious hour of strategic crisis. No great power rescuer, there is no messiah was coming in any meaningful way. If your deterrence fails, your products are degraded, your economy is choking, your ideology is tired, and your entire pattern are spectators, then you're no longer a part of regional history. You're an armed state trying to stop the floor from killing a bay. Now, the military after state. I mean, Reuters reported in May that there was no deal, no exit. Yet in the US's Iran standoff, the economic pain was deepening and the risk of the renewed war remained elevated. Same report quoted analysts arguing the strike had not delivered a total strategic knockout. That is true, and again, it matters, but does not mean rescue the regime. Because if the best case for Tehran is not victory, not restored influence, not renewed ideological momentum, but merely the avoidance of capitulation while sitting inside a deadlock of sanction, blockade pressure, internal repression, proxy degradation, and leadership insecurity, then the strategic horizon is still terrible. Survival without recovery is not success, it is a status under decay. So when I say the war revealed the regime fatal weakness, I do not mean that the air campaign instantly solved ground. It didn't. Reuters, ODNI, and multiple analysts all make clear that Iran remained capable of asymmetric harm with an important asset and could spend years trying to rebuild its missile and drone forces if the regime endures, of course. But should Iran wish. But that's exactly the point. The future and the offer is rebuilt, repressed, ration, and hide. That's not a future of strategic expansion. That's a future of salvage. A regime can stay alive in salvage mode for years, but it cannot do is honestly present salvage as destiny. And here I'm giving you the final reality. Before the epic theory, Islamic Republic declared, however, implausibly that its missile arsenal proximate for ideological fervor and security state formed a coherent model of resistance. After a big failure, those components no longer fit together clearly. I mean, the missile didn't deter decapitation, the security state didn't protect any room or any of us. Finito almost did not generate clean leverage without self-harm. The proxy didn't provide intact strategic depth. And the ideology had to be replaced with, during in mid-war, nationalism and emergence. There's a theater. That's what fatal weakness looks like. Not silence, contradiction. A system was assumed and still exists, but no longer combined into a durable ground strategy. The reality is that the regime is now a survival only phase. It can still kill, it can still threaten, it can still bargain, but it no longer can project a confident revolutionary order. It's trying to keep the lights after a war that revealed its leadership can be found, its airspace can be penetrated, its exports can be trapped, its practice can be diminished, and its own citizen can turn against it at the worst possible moment. That's a fatal weakness. And once a regime is reduced to defending survival in every direction at once, history usually stops asking whether it's strong. History starts asking how long the compression can last.